Joshua Lazoya says, why are you so determined about having national sovereignty? Isn't a global government the better way to go? By having global laws and standards, national conflicts will be easier to solve. Countries can help build one another up, and global peace will be easier to achieve. The United Nations, which was launched right at the end of World War II, was designed to bring other nations up to the standard of the West. And what it did was it took the West down to the standards of other nations. What makes anyone think that two countries would have the same goals? See, this is the kind of arrogance of it. This is the kind of intellectual arrogance that the left has. And it's arrogance brought about by stupidity. And it's stupidity brought about by arrogance, which is arrogance that brings about stupidity, and the stupidity brings about more arrogance, and you're trapped in this progressive cycle. And the way it basically works is, why don't we all just get together? If we could just get over our nationalistic differences, we'd all just get along. Why can't we just get along? See how much smarter I am than you ammoed up conservatives with your guns trying to defend this prehistoric idea of America? While we, not being as arrogant as these people, have the intelligence to say, there are things that I like to do, and there are things that people in ISIS like to do. And they're not the same things. For example, in the Middle East, in Iran or Saudi Arabia, I would want everybody to get down on their knees and pray to Mecca 5 or 6 times a day. And if I lived in Saudi Arabia, I would want women to stay indoors because I wouldn't want anyone to see them, because I'm terrified of women if I'm a Saudi. And I would want to make sure that everything is set up exactly just for me, and anybody who disagrees cuts my head off. But the main thing is getting down and praying to Allah 5 times a day, no alcohol, no gambling, no premarital sex, no music, no dancing, no kissing in public, nothing. If I'm a Saudi, that's what I want. This argument assumes, see, here's the arrogance of it. This argument assumes that if we could just get down and talk to the Saudis, then the Saudis would suddenly turn into Berkeley hot tub liberals. In other words, well, we just work our problems out. Really? What would that solution look like? Oh, the Saudis would kind of loosen up. And they'd let women in Saudi Arabia do what they want to do. I think that's swell. What makes you think the Saudis would loosen up? And why did the Saudis have to loosen up, by the way? If you're going to solve the problem, what are you going to do? Are you going to get down and pray to Mecca 5 times a day? Are you going to give up alcohol for the rest of your life because you're trying to solve a problem with people who live in Saudi Arabia? What if the deal is, okay, the Saudis agree to drop the veil, but we agree to kill all the homosexuals. How about that? How would that be for a deal, for a compromise? When people talk about these compromises and all of this being a misunderstanding, it's the arrogance of them saying the solution to the misunderstanding is they'll do everything the way we want them to. We won't have to fight them for it. We won't have to go to war. They'll just come along. They'll be Berkeley conservatives. And if they want to be real San Francisco conservatives, maybe their guys can start having sex in the street in leather outfits in broad daylight. But that's the arrogance of it, because they're real people too, you see. And they outnumber us. And what they want is not what we want. I want to be able to say, I think the Prophet Muhammad is a warmongering, pedophile, slave-owning murderer who deserves as much worship as anyone else who's a slave-owning, pedophile, mass murderer. Now, if I said that in another part of the world, I'd be killed. I like being able to say that, and I'll fight for it. I'm not going to give it up. Likewise, they're not going to give up the idea that saying something like that is cause for stoning to death of the person that said it. You see, this whole thing about sovereignty being given up and us living under the auspices of the United Nations is the arrogance of people with small minds and even smaller imaginations, assuming that everybody's going to do things the way they want them to. But it ain't necessarily so. And the only people that they will argue with and fight with, these liberal progressive douchebags, is with people in their own culture. In other words, if you told them that they had to go to church every Sunday, once a week instead of 5, 6 times a day, they would take to the streets with torches at the idea of being forced into Christianity and having these beliefs forced on them. By having a display, there's a Santa Claus out in the middle of a square, that's repulsive and repugnant to me, take it down. But somehow the Saudis and ISIS and all these other people are going to change everything they believe to accommodate them? No. We already know how intolerant the left is. They won't let somebody have a frickin' Santa Claus display. They expect that these people who live in Sharia are suddenly going to sit down, have a nice Chardonnay in a hot tub, and talk about their gay lovers. It ain't going to happen. And since it ain't going to happen, you better be prepared to fight them. As I said before, we're not the ones with the coexist problems. They are. But since they do have a coexist problem, and there are no coexist bumper stickers in Iran or in the Crimea with those tanks going into Russia, in that case, I think we're the ones who ought to be ammoed up, because we coexist actually pretty well. There you go. Moving on.